Good day to you all. My name is Chielozona Eze, the president of Igbo Studies Association. Welcome to the second inaugural lecture series to be delivered by our ex-president, eminent scholar and African historian, Professor Apollos Nwauwa. Professor Apollos Nwauwa is a professor of history and Africana studies at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio. Was educated in Nigeria and Canada, and Professor Nwauwa obtained his BA in history from then Bendel State University, it's now Ambrose Ali University, Ekpoma, and later he earned his master's degree and PhD degrees in history from Dalhousie University, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. Professor Nwauwa has taught for over 20 years in various institutions in Nigeria, in the USA, in Ghana, including Bendel State University and University of Calabar, both in Nigeria. He also taught in Rhode Island College, Brown University, and now Bowling Green State University in the US, as well as Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Kumasi, Ghana. Over 10 years, Dr. Nwauwa served as the director of Africana Studies program at Bowling Green State University. His teaching and research focus on modern African and African diaspora and the Igbo of Southern Nigeria. Besides his well-received seminar work titled Imperialism, Academe and Nationalism, Britain and Politics of University Education for Africans, he has published and edited monographs, over 10 monographs, and over 30 refereed scholarly works in many reputable peer-reviewed international journals. Some of the journals include Anthropos, Cahiers d'études africaines, Africa Quarterly, Journal of Asian and African Studies, History in Africa, Canadian Journal of African History, Historical Studies, and IFE Journal of History and others. Dr. Nwauwa is on the board of many journals and non-profit organizations, and he is the editor of OFO, Journal of Transatlantic Studies. So please help me to welcome our lecturer today, Professor Apollos Nwauwa.
Thank you, Honorable President of Igbo Studies Association, for that generous introduction. And I also want to welcome our members of ISA who are here, and also other folks who are not members of the association, but who are interested in the topic. Mr. President, I want to thank you for the invitation to present this series. And it's always a delight to be in the midst of scholars, to engage in meaningful dialogue. As you read, the title of today's lecture is Igbo Scholars and the Making of the New African Intellectual Tradition, Professor K.O. Dike in Perspective. That is the title of today's lecture. And first, I want to make a few disclaimers. I want to say that this is not the first ever lecture to be presented on Dike. This is just an addition in the litany of lectures that are being presented on the man. So you, in the course of this lecture, you are going to hear me make a lot of references, a lot of quotes also on others who have talked about Dike. Of course, you know that a history of a particular society or person is never exhausted by every scholar, every writer approaches it from a particular vantage point. And so in this case, I am going to approach Dike in a very different way. And another another caveat I also want to mention here is that you will see that there's an emphasis on Igbo scholars. I think it's important for us to use that term because given the political climate of Nigeria today, it is often forgotten that the Igbo, just like other ethnicities, have been in the vanguard of a whole lot of development in the country, whether it is political development, where we have the leader, the forerunner, as Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, my colleague. In the intellectual realm too, we do have an Igbo intellectual who was pushing that movement. In fact, even if you go to the commercial realm, you saw the first millionaire in Nigeria was Louis Ojukwu, who was the father of the late General Ojukwu, and in other fields. And so Igbo Studies Association was founded to just rediscover and to, just engage scholars across the world on not only what the Igbos have accomplished over time, but also to talk about our culture and society. And that's the foundation of Igbo Studies Association. So having said that, I also want to say quickly, I use the term, the new intellectual tradition. Someone would say, what was the old intellectual tradition then? Well, the old intellectual tradition was the one anchored on European mindset. The way they put it, of course, the people who were involved in the conquest of Nigeria, you would know right away the conquest of Nigeria and indeed Africa. The historical tradition they left, the trail of it was one that was so patronizing, the one that justified their presence, as colonizers, and the one that justified or insisted on African mental inferiority, and so on. So that was the tradition that Professor Dike and his colleague met. And what we're going to look at here is what Dike did to try to change that narrative and that course. So for the interest of this conversation or this lecture, I have divided my presentation into four major categories, namely one, overview of the man Dike. Overview of the man Dike, Dike's confrontation with European intellectual biases, and also Dike's approach to new methodology, and also Dike's views on African personality and Pan-Africanism. So after that, I'm going to try to conclude. And again, I just want to say, I crave your indulgence to give some time to what we are going to look at today. I want to also say, and bring your attention to what Professor Adela Fibo told us about talking about Dike. He cautioned us, and I quote, "Dike's contribution to the study of African history is too large to be exhausted or to be exhaustively discussed within the compass of one lecture," unquote. So since this professor has told us this, I wonder whether this lecture will really exhaustively discuss Dike, but I can only say that I'm going to do my best. Let's turn to an overview of the man, Dike, his background and accolades. Dike was born in Awka, in present-day Anambra State, Nigeria, in December 1917, and he attended Dennis Memorial Grammar School, Onitsha, then Achimota College in Ghana, and Furabe College in Sierra Leone, before he proceeded to Scotland at the University of Aberdeen, where he did his master's degree in history, and then to the University of London for a doctoral degree in history also, which was awarded in 1950. The same year, Dike returned to Nigeria to take up a teaching position at the then University College, later University of Ibadan. That was the first West African university, full-fledged university, but it was a university college. That was what the name, because it was tied to the apron string of the University of London. It was just an appendage of the University of London, so they called it University College Ibadan until 1960, when it became a full-fledged university, University of Ibadan. So in 1950, Dike joined the department, the faculty of the history department of Ibadan, and became the very first African with a doctoral degree to teach African history at an African university. I said he became the first African with a doctoral degree to teach African history at an African university. At this time, it may interest you to note that at the University of Ibadan in the Department of History, there were three major courses that were taught. One was British history. The second was European history. And the third was the history of the colonization of Africa by alien races. If you look at this, there's not really anything authentically African history in it. And Dike's effort when he joined the department then was to see if he could introduce real African history to deal with the African cultures, African civilization, and the African past. But that was, he hit a brick wall, because the question was, where are you going to get the textbooks? There were no textbooks existing. So what Dike did then was to withdraw from the Department of History in 1952. Remember, he joined in 50, and 2 years after, he had to withdraw from that. And he withdrew to join the West African Institute for Social and Economic Research, WISER, which later became Nigerian Institute for Social and Economic Research. While at this institute, what Dike did was just to pursue a very rigorous, vigorous research, revise his dissertation for publication, and pioneer the establishment of Nigerian National Archives, of which he later became the director. So after he did this, he rejoined the University of the Department of History in 1952, because he took 2 years off and rejoined the university in and became a full professor and head of department, and began to recruit more African staff to help him in the building of that department. In fact, it was Professor Dike who recruited Professor J.C. Anene, Professor J.F. Ade Ajayi, and also recruited Professor Ade Aderi Bibe, and as well as Prof. Chieka Ife Mesia. He recruited these folks to help him build the department. And in 1960, Dike became the first indigenous principal and later the first vice chancellor of the University of Ibadan from 1960 to 1966. Dike was the founder of the Nigerian National Archives. He was the founder of the Nigerian National Museum and Monument. He was the founder of the Nigerian Institute of African Studies at the University College Ibadan. He was all equally the founder of the Center for Arabic Documentation, and as well as a Benin Historical Research Scheme. And finally, he founded the Historical Society of Nigeria. One of Dike's accomplishments that, not a whole lot of scholars make mention of this was his struggle, his fight to make sure he secured scholarship for indigent students. In fact, it was Dike who persuaded the Balewa's government to establish what they call bursary award for students. That was one of the things Dike did. Dike's contribution as pioneer of the new African intellectual climate has been highlighted in several citations, several honorary degrees, and several recognitions worldwide. In fact, Dike obtained no less than 15 honorary doctorates, 12 of which came from universities outside the shores of Nigeria. No Nigerian, indeed, no African has ever been so honored with so many distinguished honorary doctorates as Dike. In each citation, during the award of honorary Doctor of Law in 1979, Michigan State University compared the contribution of Dike to those of Nicholas Copernicus. Some of you who know of Copernicus. Copernicus was a Polish astronomer who dramatically altered the medieval belief in Earth-centered universe. Like Copernicus, the university, in other words, Michigan State University, affirmed that Dike, quote, looked at his country from the inside out, and suddenly no history written of any part of Africa can ever be the same. For the whole prospect has been changed. Apologetic or condescending history of Africa are banished, like colonialism itself, unquote. That was the University of Michigan. Similarly, in awarding Dike an honorary degree in 1979, the University of Ghana at Legon described him as, quote, pioneer of scientific African historiography, ambassador of African history, and father of the modern historiography of Nigeria and of Africa, unquote. That was the University of Legon. Unfortunately, Dike's life was cut short on October 26, 1983, at a relatively young age of 65, after a sudden illness. With his death, the intellectual world of African historians seemed to have crumbled. But Dike left all scholars of Africa and African diaspora, especially historians, splendid and enduring legacy for which they continue to be proud. In his memorable eulogy at the graveside of Dike in November 1983, his protege, Prof. Chika Ifemesia, on behalf of the Historical Society of Nigeria, lauded Dike as a history king, superman of learning, great scholar, doyen of the brave, repeated abroad. Indeed, in his first Dike Memorial Lecture, the eminent Nigerian historian, Professor J.F. Adajayi, also described Dike as, quote, a pioneer in modern African historiography, unquote. Similarly, in his lecture, in the 44th lecture, annual lecture of the Congress of the Historical Society of Nigeria, held at the University of Abuja on November 22nd, 1999, another eminent historian, Professor Bala Usman of Ahmadu Bello University, affirmed that the contribution of Dike is, quote, is of world significance because of the crucial role he played in the building of the moral, conceptual, academic, administrative, and material capacity for liberating the study of history, of the society, and of the cultures of mankind from domination, unquote. So based on these citations and the scholarly affirmations that I have just made here, we can isolate a few things. One, Dike as a liberator of African history and culture. Two, Dike as a father of modern African historiography. And three, Dike as the forerunner or the harbinger of the rediscovery of authentic African intellectual culture. No less instructive are Dike's ideas on African personality and identity, African nationality, African and Africanization also, and Pan-Africanism. Now let me turn to the second session of this presentation, which deals with today's confrontation with Western intellectual biases and distortion which is at the core of what he did. As the foremost historian, Dike had his assignment, cut out for him. His first task was to deconstruct the perverting Western patronizing and condescending narratives about Africans and their culture. Secondly, to effectively accomplish the first task, Dike had to initiate a new scholarly direction in the study of Africa. One of Dike's first publications, which gained international notice and brought him into the limelight as a rising star in African intellectual history, was actually not a book. It wasn't even a book. Rather, it was an article entitled African History and Self-Government, which was serialized in a periodical, West Africa of London. It was a periodical, publication that is usually issued in London. It was in February and March of 1953 that Dike wrote the article, entitled African History and Self-Government. That article was in response to another article that was published in the famous Foreign Affairs in London. And that was published by Professor Marjorie Perham, entitled British Problems in Africa. That was the article that Marjorie Perham published in African Affairs. And that was also in Foreign Affairs, not African Affairs. That was also the article to which Dike issued a rejoinder. Now, what did Marjorie Perham say? Marjorie Perham had argued in that article that he published in Foreign Affairs that, quote, the meeting of the West with Asia for all present disparity and of material power will have to be between equals in status, unquote. While the, quote, dealings between tropical Africa and the West must be different, unquote. As to why this difference should exist, Marjorie Perham argued, and I quote, this is a long quote, here like in Africa, in place of the larger unities of Asia, was the multicellular tissue of tribalism. Instead of the larger unity of Asia, that instead of an ancient civilization, the larger area of primitive poverty enduring into the modern age, until the very recent penetration of Europe, the greater part of the continent was without the wheel, the plow, and the transport animals, almost without stone houses or clothes, except for skiing, without history, and so without writing, and so without history, unquote. That was Marjorie Perham. The essence of what he was saying here is that Africa just extremely this was in 1953, extremely primitive, had not developed anything, they had no writing, and therefore no history. That was what Marjorie Perham was writing here. By then, Dike had gotten his PhD in history. Look, granted that this sort of statement by Marjorie Perham was commonplace in Europe at that time, and even the way they were depicted Africans, that's the old intellectual tradition. Dike was deeply troubled. As a side note, let me just say here that Marjorie Perham wasn't the very first to get into this kind of a depiction of Africans in these very disparaging terms. Let me just say that this has been going on for quite some time in a classical time. In fact, one might recall that David Hume, the well-known philosopher in history, has said similar things. Also, George Hegel, the German well-known George Hegel, has said similar things. Professor C.G. Seligman, also, these are all European writers, said similar things, just like Marjorie Perham. For instance, let me just say, give me just a second. Let me give you what David Hume said about Africans that almost kind of, resemble exactly what Major Parham said here. David Hume said, let me quote him. I am apt, quote, I'm apt to suspect the Negro to be naturally inferior to the white. There never was a civilized nation of any other complexion than white, nor even any individual eminent either in action or speculation. No ingenious manufacturers among them, no art and no science, unquote. That was David Hume. Even as late as 1830, George Hegel, who wrote a famous book, The Philosophy of History, had in that work, because he's an acclaimed philosopher, George Hegel, he said this about Africa and Africans. I just want to say this so that you see exactly where Major Parham is coming from and what I also called the old intellectual tradition about Africa. Now, here was what George Hegel said, quote, it is manifest that want of self-control distinguishes the character of the Negro. This condition is capable of no development or culture. And as we have seen them at this day, so have they always been. At this point, let us leave Africa, not to mention it again, for it is no historical part of the world. It has no movement or development to exhibit, unquote. That was George Hegel in 1830. And finally, let me just say this quickly before I return back to my lecture. C.G. Seligman, another writer, another British writer, in a book that he published in 1929, actually did some research on Africa and saw some civilization, saw some development, saw a lot of great things there. But here's what he said. The civilization of Africa is the civilization of the Hamites, unquote. But as to who these Hamites were, Seligman said that the Hamites who belong to the same great branch of mankind as whites civilized Africa. Now you see there's a litany, I think there's a thread of these conclusions that has been going on. But Dike was troubled with Major Parham's writing here, because Major Parham, was very influential in Britain at that time. In the first place, the assertion came from a very influential figure and a leading advisor to the colonial office on African territories. Secondly, we're talking about why Dike was troubled. Secondly, Parham's claim was put forward at a time when Africans were already getting excited about imminent independence that was coming, especially in the Gold Coast. Undoubtedly, her claim had the potency of frustrating political progress in Africa, and Dike was not going to let that fly. Finally, Parham had once advised Dike not to proceed with his PhD program, but to return to Nigeria to take up employment in the colonial service. Of course, Dike ignored her and obtained his PhD degree before returning to Nigeria. Against all odds, even when it meant stepping on big toes of the colonial officials, including his employers at Ibadan, Dike decided to write a very critical and forceful rejoinder to Major Parham's article. In some sense, however, I believe that there was a silver lining in Major Parham's article. I believe there was some kind of a silver lining. It helped to reinforce Dike's resolve to confront and deconstruct all forms of negative and baseless intellectual hypotheses on Africa and its heritage as perpetrated by Western scholars. In other words, Peram forced out the intellectual beast in Dike and the baptism of fire needed for his lifetime crusade for a new approach to the study of Africa, African cultures, and African societies. He was quite mindful of European cultural arrogance of his time, and therefore strove to call attention to the enduring and universal realism of cultural relativism. In his reply to Peram, Dike contended that, quote, there is no criterion by which to compare one culture in terms of progress with another, unquote. Because he says, quote, because each is the product of its environment and must primarily be judged in relation to the community which it serves. The term culture is used to cover a wide range of fields like laws, custom, tradition, music, art, moral, belief, dress, and everything that gives a full life to a community. Consequently, Dike argued that, quote, there is no people without a culture and civilization of his own, without some means of controlling it, its environment in a manner more or less corresponding to its needs, unquote. Those using transport, housing, or clothing to support their theories, Dike insisted, quote, are perpetuating the errors of the 19th century evolutionists by merely reacting to their own conditioning, which has given them a predisposition to favor their own culture and to place differing cultures on levels which are deemed less advanced. Dike affirmed that many negative statements about Africa, quote, rest on the evidence of history. No, quote, rest not on evidence of history or of ascertained facts, but on preconceived notions, which in other contexts, the scholars responsible would dismiss with appropriate academic detachment, unquote. At the relevance, as for the relevance of the study of history to government, Dike insisted, remember this, we're still responding to Major Peram in that op-ed, in that disclaimer, that's a rebuttal. That's what Dike is saying here. So he is turning to the question of history and self-government. Dike insisted that for the emergent states of Africa, quote, there is no study as important as that of history, unquote. He affirms that, quote again, our past is very much a part of our present. And as we comprehend that past, so will the problem of the present be illuminated. Most great and far-reaching movements have begun with a romantic appeal to the past, unquote. Thus, the modern era in Europe, European history, opened with the Italian Renaissance and also European nationalist movement of the 19th century, which began with a romantic appeal to many decisive revolutions in world history, such as the Puritan, the American, and the French Revolution. African nationalist leaders have followed this path in the recognition of the fact that, quote, to succeed, they must appeal to the imagination of the masses, and that history is the best means. It matters little to them whether this history is written or oral, unquote. Obafemi Awolowo and his Egbe Omo Oduduwa was a classic example. Although the Yorubas claim that Oduduwa was the son of God and the history of humankind started at Ile-Ife, a long line of kings after Oduduwa were historic figures. According to Dike, quote, oral history with their usually long genealogies start off with mythical kings, but as a rule, the remaining portion of the list are historic. and the tales of epic events and outstanding personalities. When allowance has been made for vanity and prejudice, then they are fairly correct. The rest are fairly correct. That's what he's telling us here. Dike's timely and well-articulated reply to Param revealed the intellectual, the nationalist, and the Pan-Africanist in him. He reasserted the pride and place of African history, culture, and civilization in the world. During the era of European colonialism, as Dike later observed, the powers that be used and controlled history for their own ends. It followed that anyone who deviated from the official version threatened the status quo. Yet Dike deviated from that official colonialist, racist approach to history. He was not prepared to overlook and continue the control of history any longer. After all, his training and experience had prepared him for his pioneering role for a new intellectual approach. That he was not afraid of upsetting the status quo places him in the category of intellectual heroes of his time. Clearly, Dike was determined to change the course of history, beginning with correcting the misrepresentations of Africa, African people, African culture, and African civilizations. Folks, let me turn now quickly to his role in the new methodology and historiography and through the Ibadan School of History. In Dike's foreword to J.F. Ajayi's book, Christian Mission in Nigeria, Dike clearly laid out his idea on the new intellectual approach to African historical methodologies and historiography. This was what Dike had to say. Documentary evidence had become so overwhelmingly important for the European scholar that he tended to equate written documents with history and to take the absence of documents to mean the absence of events worthy of historical study. As a result, in the 19th century, when Europe occupied Africa, her scholars did not attempt to understand or to build on the historical tradition in existence there. They sought instead to challenge and to supplant them. The history of European traders, missionaries, explorers, conquerors, and rulers constituted, in their view, the sum total of African history, unquote. This was a foreword that was written by K.O. Dike on the for the book that Professor J.F. Ajayi published. And it was in this foreword that he really articulated his new ideas and what he sees that is wrong with that intellectual mindset that focused or was just tied or enslaved to written documents. The above statement here informed Dike's forceful rebuttal of Marjorie Perham, as we've seen. And so it is here that he made his point known. But Dike also did a seminal work himself. The seminal work, or the first book that Dike wrote that had a lot of attracted world attention, was entitled Trade and Politics in the Niger Delta, published by Oxford University in 1956. This marked a new era for African history and historiography. In fact, one of the prominent reviewers of this book was Professor John E. Flint, who happened to be my supervisor anyway. John Flint asserted that the debut of Dike's Trade and Politics, quote, is an event of more than academic interest, unquote. While it is true that Dike was not the first West African to write a serious history, having been preceded by people like Samuel Johnson's classic History of the Yorubas, John Flint says, quote, Dike heralds a new era of African historiography stemming from the new political and social situation in the British West African colonies, unquote. Relying on documents supplemented by a large body of oral sources, Dike exposed so much evidence about African motives, ambition, economic interest, political designs, social structures, and religious belief. His analysis of the complicated pattern of trade and rivalry in the city-states of the Niger Delta initiated a new understanding of African reaction to European commercial and social stimuli. In a sense, he equally destroyed the historical myth surrounding European relations during the era of colonial expansion. Although Dike's study was local in nature, concentrating on the Niger Delta as it were, it resulted in what could be aptly described as a new intellectual revolution. Trade and politics became a classic in his field and achieved a status which placed it almost beyond criticism. It inspired more than a dozen other major works dealing with the Niger Delta. This was because trade and politics touched on nearly all the important themes in the history of Southern Nigeria in the 19th century and early 20th century, and thus attracting many other scholars to take up each of these themes for more detailed study and explanation. In fact, Ebere Nwubani has shown how Dike stepped outside the norm of interpreting British abolition of the slave trade as, a quote, the willing and dealing of the humanitarians to adopt a counter-narrative developed by Eric Williams, unquote. At the end of the 18th century, according to Dike, Western Europe was experiencing extraordinary changes in which, quote, a predominantly mercantile epoch was being succeeded by a predominantly industrial age. In Dike's view, it was this unprecedented transformation that rendered the slave trade obsolete. Yet Dike did not ignore the powerful efforts of the humanitarian. Therefore, he concluded that both the economic and the humanitarian factors were complementary, and any attempt to explain one without reference to the other will lead to an oversimplification of a very complex issue, unquote. Decisively, Dike pointed to the direction to which future historical research on Africa headed. Now, he published another pamphlet, a pamphlet that was entitled The Origin of the Niger Mission. This particular pamphlet stimulated a lot of writing, one by J.F. Adeajayi, another one by Ayandele, and another. A lot of other historians began to latch on because he was more or less the agenda setter at Ibadan at that time. It was mainly this new orientation that became popularized as what we used to call, quote, the Ibadan School of History at the University College. Although Dike employed this term to refer to a new approach in the Department of History at Ibadan, this school espoused neither Dikeism or any strict ideology analogous to that of the Dar es Salaam school at all. Rather, the Ibadan school was focused on African studies subjected to rigorous historical research. The aim of the Ibadan school, as Dike described it, was to facilitate the publication of several books and monographs and journal articles, and to form a major beginning that will emerge for the study of Africa, new orientation that will look at Africa and African people in a different way. Although Dike's publishing record or output may appear relatively rather small in quantity, yet its quality and impact remains till date the greatest and the best thing that has happened to African historical studies. For he not only raised African historical consciousness to a new level, but showed by precept and example how African experience can be rewardingly probed and for what purpose. I turn to, I think we are rolling along. Let me turn to his view on African personality, and then I'll conclude this lecture. Dike was a Pan-Africanist whose intellectual stature transcended Nigeria and Africa. His campaign for a new intellectual culture in Africa was rooted in his conviction that, quote, the Black man, like other human beings, has tremendous merit, has an immense contribution to make to the reservoir of world culture, and should be given a chance to make this in the best way that will do justice to him and to the world of which he's a part, unquote. Dike played a pivotal role in his co-sponsorship of the first World Festival of Negro Arts with President Leopold Senghor of Senegal in 1966. Like Senghor, Dike was a crusader for the concept of negritude, which was defined then as an affirmation or consciousness of the value of the Black or African culture, heritage, and identity. Dike was an erudite giant that can hardly be ignored in any serious discourse on African studies and African historiography. Like other Pan-Africanists, Dike's contribution, especially in creation of new African historiography, served to elevate history, culture, and dignity of Africans in the continent, as well as those of Africans in the diaspora. Dike's reputation as a consequential scholar spread overseas quite rapidly. First, his compelling reply to Marjorie Perram's piece in 1953 gained him immediate recognition, not only in Britain, but worldwide, as an authority on African studies and African history. Soon after, Dike became the very first president of the International Congress of Africanists, the first African chairman of the International African Institute, London, and the first African to be elected as honorary member of the Historical Association of Great Britain. However, Dike's dazzling career abruptly ended in 1966, many years even before his actual death. By 1966, Nigeria had spiraled into political crisis that resulted in the outbreak of the infamous Nigerian Biafran War of 1967 to 1970. As ethnic politics and hostility engulfed the country, culminating in the mass killing of his ethnic Igbo across Nigeria. Dike was forced to resign his position as Vice Chancellor of the University of Ibadan out of fear for his own life and to return to his people in Eastern Nigeria. For almost 10 years, this icon was forgotten. Following the end of the war and the defeat of the Biafran struggle in 1970, Dike left Nigeria for Harvard University in the United States, where he sojourned for almost 10 years as an Igbo diaspora, as part of the Igbo diaspora. At Harvard, Dike pioneered the teaching of African history almost the same time that African Americans were demanding Black studies. at that same university. His lectures and also his the program he instituted, they attracted many students as Dike made African history and heritage relevant to Africans in diaspora, stressing that African American history could never be complete unless it was linked to that of the African continent. Dike returned to Nigeria in 1980, in fact, to become the president of another new university, Anambra State University of Technology. No doubt, Dike's intellectual revolution transcended the continental borders of Africa. It was transatlantic as well as global, increasingly focusing on African heritage to stimulate a diasporic intellectual consciousness on African studies. In conclusion, I'd like to conclude now. By and large, Dike was an African intellectual icon who forced a new scholarly orientation or new scholarly reorientation. As J.F. Adeajayi insisted, and I quote, "No one has done more to promote a sense of history as an essential ingredient of our national development than the late Kenneth Onwuka Dike," unquote. Indeed, what Dike did for African historiography parallels the contribution of Western scholars such as Thucydides and also Leopold von Ranke. It is true that Dike was not the first to employ oral sources for historical studies, since that tradition is as old as ancient Greeks. But it was Dike who blazed the trail in getting this methodology accepted as a part of a scholarly source for doctoral training. Absence of written records, whether in Africa or elsewhere in the world, no longer means absence of history, culture, and civilization. Thanks to Dike, and this was later picked up also by Jean Van Sina. As the first African head of the Department of History and the first African Vice Chancellor of the Nigerian Premier University between 1950 and 1966, Dike transformed the institution by infusing African content in his offering, while maintaining international best practice. Foreign students, including Europeans and Americans, began to seek admission into Ibadan, thanks to Dike. Given the series of monographs that were produced by the Ibadan School, Dike was the general editor of that. The number of issues, number of publications by the Historical Society of Nigeria increased rapidly. Dike was able to revise the syllabus, and West African Examination Council was also able to adopt the syllabus for history as recommended by Dike. As one of Ibadan expatriate faculty, Professor J.D. Omakupa stated, as he puts it, and I quote him here as conclusion, he says, quote, "From such humble beginning, the teaching and the study of African history at the Ibadan steadily expanded, making us the greatest center of African historical scholarship on the continent," unquote. All in all, Professor Ajayi summarizes it best when he affirmed that, quote, "Dike was a distinguished scholar, a man of integrity, a highly principled educationist, a successful administrator, a far-sighted pioneer who helped to build several enduring institutions that have served and are serving Nigeria and Africa well," unquote. Undeniably, Dike was an intellectual colossus whom we will continue to celebrate as one of the greatest minds that shaped the 20th century intellectual history in Africa. Indeed, I can't agree more with Professor Adiela Fibo, who concluded, as I quoted in the beginning of this lecture, that Dike's contribution to the study of Africa African history is too large to be exhaustively discussed within the compass of one lecture. You can see why I have not really said enough about Dike. Nevertheless, permit me to stop here and thank you for your time, and thank you again for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Nwauwa. And please help me to congratulate him and then thank him very much for this wonderful lecture. Yeah, it's really a cornucopia of historical information and lesson. And if you will grant me the apology, I think prior to this moment, I knew only the name Kenneth Dike, and I didn't know his importance, his relevance in African history. And it's truly providential that our first two lecturers are professors of history. And that reminds me of, I think it's Judge Santayana saying that those who are ignorant of their past, of their history, are bound to repeat the mistakes of their past. So history, I would say, is basically the building block of every intellectual pursuit, and every people who desires to know itself, a group of people who wants to know itself, they must know their history. And Kenneth Dike has provided us this pathway, and I can say that he'll be clapping wherever he is, and because he has found a worthy progeny in Professor Nwauwa. So while you are getting ready for your questions and for your contributions, I'll take the next 2 seconds just to say a few things I jotted down. Number one, Kenneth Dike has set out to challenge Western biases about the African personhood, the African history. And according to Professor Nwauwa, Kenneth Dike's first task was to deconstruct the Western narratives about Africa, and then to establish a new scholarly field. And starting with his very prominent article on African history and self-government. So in response to Marjorie Perham. So his writing is to be then understood as basically a corrective of the Western misconceptions about Africa. And while Professor Nwauwa was giving this lecture, I actually observed a similarity between Professor Dike's intervention in the Western perception of Africa and the Chinua Achebe's task, which was basically to correct Joseph Conrad and other Western writers' misconception of Africa. So, quoting Professor Nwauwa, Marjorie Perham's article forced out the intellectual beast in Dike. I love that expression. So essentially, it's all about the relevance of history. Our past is very much a part of our present, as Kenneth Dike said. And then he went on to establish a new methodology called Ibadan School of History. And he's also played a very important role in the conception of African personality, and being a Pan-Africanist and a negritudist, in the sense that he believes that a Black man has a contribution to make, and the Black people must believe in themselves. And to end it, Adela Fibo says Kenneth Dike's contribution to African history is too large to be exhausted in a particular lecture. But then I feel that I've gotten actually a decent insight into Professor Dike's contribution. And history, especially that I was so elated when I heard that history is often a child of romantic appeal to the past, and this is just beautiful. So I'll now once again, Professor Onwuka, I thank you very much. You can't imagine how happy I am, and how educated I have been. So I now open the floor to questions or contributions or comments. And as I said, I muted all of you. So when you are, remain muted unless you want to make your contribution. You can indicate your presence with either raising up your hand or just letting me know, however. Thank you very much. Yes, Professor Njoku.
Okay. Thank you very much. Again, I'm living in the West Coast and have to wake up very early this morning in my pajamas so that I don't miss this lecture. And, I tell you, I thank God I was able to wake up and tune into Professor Onwuka's lecture, being an intellectual historian myself, and I attended Dalhousie University where he graduated. Our tradition there is intellectual history. I am blessed to be here today. Thank you so much, Professor Onwuka. Listening to your lecture, one of the areas that really got me, and it almost brought tears to my ears, to my eyes, was when you talked about how Professor Dike helped in the establishment of archives in Nigeria, museums in Nigeria, research institutes, and so on and so on and so forth. And it was only this week, what an irony, I hired a research assistant in Nigeria to go to Nsukka and get some materials for me. And when she got there, she had been there 3 times last week. She found out that the very newspapers I was looking for, newspapers of the 50s and 60s, had been burned. The librarians brought them out and burned them. And that reminds me also, I think about 7 years ago, I went to the great Alvan Ikoku College of Education because we used to have those newspapers there. I was so confident I would see them there. I was so happy I went there. And they told me they had burned them because there was no space. So my question is, if Dike was alive today, Dike and his cohorts, how would they describe or explain the kind of historical genocide that is happening at the great University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and Alvan, and other institutions in Nigeria, burning historical records for no good reason, instead of thinking about digitization or even reserving them because there are spaces. In the case of Alvan, they told me they had to burn them so that they would use the space to sell granules and other kinds of snacks within the campus. So I wonder what Dike would have said, learning about this kind of trend in Nigeria today.
Well, Dike, thank you, Prof. Raf Njoku. Dike would have just shedded tears, just like tears, just as you described. And I tell you, it is sad. It is the saddest thing. I have gone to Nigeria and several times and gone to these archives. And sometimes you go there and what you see, just makes your heart bleed. And then talking about the effort, what you saw, what I described here, Dike had to take 2 years off because he went, he was trying to teach and there was no writing, nothing, no documentation. He took 2 years off to go and make sure that he did a lot of research and established those, because he knew that is the basis upon which any country can reconstruct his past, can save his past in document. They've been telling him about written records and documentation. And now he established museum and monuments. Those are documentation. Those are for our fossils and artifacts. He also established archives and for actual written documents. And now they either have been looted, because I was at the University of Ibadan. I was also at the one at Enugu National Archives. I just saw these things, and is that we are not talking about documentation. Other countries have moved ahead, but in fact, sometimes you see some of these records, even those workers in the archives. If you give them some real money, they may even give you a file and say, take it out, take it with you. No problem. It's not because it seems as if they don't know the value, and so it is something that makes one bleed. I saw that there was a time I was doing a research in Nigeria. In fact, in the Ministry of Education, I went to Abuja and I was asking for a particular year, say from 19, I think it was from 1950 to about 1970. I said, whatever you have, please, I need to see that. You know what they told me? That there is nothing existing at all in the ministry about that. I said, what happened? They used to have a room full of that, but what happened? That, oh, the vehicle, when we were moving from Lagos to Abuja, the vehicle that all those documents were packed in, the vehicle they were packed in, got burned. It just got burnt. I said, where? Oh, they left everything there. That the thing just burned and it just destroyed all the documents, all of them. And that is the kind of thing we are facing. So digitization of the document is very important these days.
Okay.
But I tell you, that is where we find ourselves.
Can I please add to what you said, please?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is George from New York. Prof, thank you very much for this wonderful lecture. Based on what the gentleman said about going to Nsukka and going to Avan, things were burned down, I think it should be about time the scholars and the professors of history should write to all these universities or schools to please maintain records and then support them in a way because they don't know better. And these records could be digitalized these days, but then if you cannot make them electronics, they can as well store them, so we can teach them, we can help them to understand the importance of keeping those records because they don't know. If they know, they wouldn't burn them. So I put it on you, the professors of history, to make effort to reach out to University of Nigeria so that they can create room for storage. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's. I think it's well taken, and this is something that I think everybody has to be in the vanguard here. Everybody has to lead this struggle because really, what the historians are doing, they are trying to make sure that these documents do exist there. But remember, every discipline creates its own record. And every discipline creates its own record and also wish that record to be stored. Whether political scientists, whether mathematicians, whether they want those things to be stored, just like historians would like them to be stored. Because I can do a research in the development of mathematics in Nigeria, and if those folks don't save their records, I will not have anything to work with. And so it is every discipline has a stake in the preservation of records, because that's what historians do, is just to use these things to reconstruct a good story or a major documentation that you have. But everyone has to, whether is a piece of art you create, it has to be saved somewhere. So we as scholars, I think it's just one of those things that scholars are also asked to find a way to preserve these things. But you know what? It is the resources. You create the resources, you create the building, you get those who are knowledgeable about it, employ them and fund them, and then they will digitize and save our records.
All right.
I think that's where we have to end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Ikechukwu Ikerion, you raised your hand.
Oh, Ikerion. Oh.
Could I ask you to unmute yourself?
I will.
Great. I mean, Ikechukwu. Great.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Prof. It's nice seeing you again. According to what Professor Dike said, it's not just the universities. Just last November, we're trying to do a documentary. So we needed some information on all the TV shows like Cockrell Dawn, Village Headmaster. And we went to the NTA archives and they don't have it. They don't have it. So someone referred us to University of London, where most of those things are archived. You know, so when you look at the political economy of education in Nigeria, it has come to a point where everybody, because according to Paulo Ferreira in his work, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, he said that conscientization, he was struggling because they wanted to interpret the word conscientizazo in Portuguese into English. He struggled. It took him years before he agreed for that word to be translated to English. Why am I saying this? The ingredients of interpretation means a lot. So the word, when we talk about deconstruction, decolonization, conscientization, it is the work of everybody. If I remember correctly, by 1952, we had over 115 students at Ibadan, Igbo students, as against 118 Westerners. So the question is, what has happened to that intellectual drive? It is not the duty of the historians alone. It is the duty of everybody, even that man that sells papers somewhere in Ajalaba. If we understand what education is, if we understand what history is. Prof gave an instance, example of oral history, how it's being constructed. You know, superiority, or however we want to use that word, comes from maintenance of your history. So if you allow someone else to tell, it was Dike, no, it was Chinua Achebe that said, if you allow the hunter to tell the story of the antelope, of course, the hunter will always carry the day. So I think it has come to a point where everybody, irrespective of your academic background, to start that conscientization. Otherwise, we'll be lost completely. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, but I think, as you said, yes, every one of us has to be involved in this. It's a crusade. I guess we have to try and do it collectively as DK people. These individuals did things that the entire country, it couldn't do. But the point we have today is, even when you set out, at the time he operated, it was a different time. You know, when at least he could say something and people listened to him. But what we have, the culture we have in our country today, Nigeria, and other African countries, it's not just Nigeria, is that you know, there are a whole lot of people who do not even believe in what Dike believed in, what he was trying to accomplish, what he tried to do there, because they watched him. And if you look at that, you find out that those who were hailing him, those who were calling him the Superman, the master, they cut across the country. There were some from ABU Zaria, some from even his protege, JF Adeajayi, you know, and others. They knew that this man had something to offer. The problem we have today in Nigeria is that even when they identify that someone has something to offer, either because of ethnic mix or some other thinking, the person becomes sidelined right away. Or even if the person is brought in, the idea is to how to bring him down and say, look, no, we are not in that. We are facing a lot of problems. Our mindset, even though that Dike tried to decolonize that mind, try to bring a new reorientation, it seems that we are even going back to what that old situation that he tried to get us out of, whereby we don't have even confidence in ourselves, what we can do, what we can accomplish as Black people, but instead we want to look outside and see what we can borrow. rather than what we can, really achieve by ourselves.
Thank you. Chief Dr. Ugomba?
Yes, Professor Nwauwa, let me take it home.
Yes.
We're talking about history, and I want to talk about modern history. What effort are you guys making since we're in the history department? Nigeria, being what we are, we're still learning about this old history. And the modern history is being neglected. If you go to high school or secondary school today, there's no history. What effort are you guys making to put history together so that at least for high school, elementary school, history is being learned and taught? Are you guys making it? Because I'm thinking that our students in Nigeria are not, they're not learning enough. They don't know their past, so they can't go to the future.
Yeah.
So how can we begin to write the history of Nigeria, the Eastern Zone, the Western Zone, and then have a very good book that can replace these old ones we have in Nigeria?
Thank you.
Excuse me, if I may intervene, just I think I would like to add something so that you can answer these two questions altogether.
Yes.
You said, you quoted Dike saying that history is often a child of romantic appeal to the past, that it often begins with mythology. And I'm also thinking that even though he was challenging Western ideology, but one could as well also accuse him of developing a kind of African ideology or African mythology. So I don't know, I'm wondering whether you have thought about the importance of mythology, that could also help us understand history, and the importance of mythology in self-perception, in the perception of our own world, and just that, if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I think Raf was trying to say something too.
Yes, Prof, if you want, I can take the two questions.
Okay. You do that, and I will chime in later. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Let me start with the mythology.
Yeah.
Professor, you mentioned about mythology. Yeah. So this is the case. If you look at European history, it is one of the most mythologized histories of the world. It's all about claims. Europe leads, the rest of the world follow. And they ascribe every invention to themselves. Look at the way they balkanize African history. They claimed European origin in Egypt. They discarded African origins of Egypt. So if you look at every aspect of European history, it's all about mythologies. So what Dike was saying in essence is that you cannot dislodge myths from a people's history. That's the basis of historiography, especially when you look at ancient histories where oftentimes the evidence wasn't there. Let's go back to Greek history. So they call the ancient Greek the originators of democracy, democratic tradition. But the ancient Greek did not teach the Igbos the democratic tradition, the Igbo village republic, but they claimed the origin, and the Igbos were silent. So that's mythology. So in essence, myth is part of history making. If you look at the history of the Yorubas today, it started with mythology at Ile-Ife, being the homeland of man, and every Yoruba bought into it and developed that historical consciousness and pride of an ancient Yoruba tradition and history. But if you look at the history very well and try to interpret it for its value, you find out that it's more or less like mythology. But it was on that platform that we have the current historiographical tradition among the Yorubas today. So Dike was saying in essence that we should have pride and faith in our myths and legends because they are the foundations of Igbo history. Whether you are talking about Igbo origin or Igbo migration or the achievements of Igbo heroes, those myths in essence are not really completely 100% lies or fabricated. You can always find true historical facts in them as well as embellished narratives. So that's about mythology. And the other question about conscientization and, looking at how things have slipped from Nigeria in comparison to other African nations. I tell you, in the past 1 year, I have discovered a lot. And I will caution everybody, when you're looking at issues related to Nigeria, please, please, please don't overgeneralize with other African nations. I was conducting research in Kenya. I was so surprised. Up till now, I can't believe it. People working at the archives in Kenya helped me to find what I was looking for, put them in PDF, send them to me. I said, okay, how much should I pay? They say, no, nothing, pay nothing. I can't believe it up to today. In the Gambia, where I was working a few months ago, the same thing, they gave me the material. In fact, the head of the archive said, Njoko, just give me one of your recent books. That's all I need. I sent the book to him. That was it, no charge. In Ghana, they just charged me the cost of photocopy, digitalize everything, send it to me. So when you're talking about conscientization and you are thinking that Nigeria is like every other nation, no, something has happened to Nigeria and our consciousness and our sense of reasoning that is not right. And the irony of it is that Nigeria is the highest contributor of intellectuals to the United States and other Western nations. So we have a conglomeration of very, very, very brilliant people, a pool of high valued intellectual and human resources, especially in the Igbo nation. But I want to tell you this, and some of you might be mad at me. When we talk about Biafra today, remember what Ojukwu said, Biafra of the mind. And that should start in Igbo land because we have the human resources. If we put Igbo land well, the consciousness of our own Biafran sensibility, then other things will come to us. If we don't, every other chatter, every other thing we are thinking, every other thing we are hoping will always elude us. We must work on ourselves, put our homeland right. Let it be an example for other Nigerian ethnic groups. That's my own definition of Biafra of the mind, not the violence that is going on here and there today, because it has not helped us as a people. It has not helped us as individuals. It has not helped our sense of reasoning.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Honorable President,
You didn't answer my question then.
Prof. Chelozo, Prof. Njoku will be our next speaker.
I know, I'm already
burn him down.
Now, I know. We're in touch. We're in touch.
Let me just chime in quickly, and then we go to other questions. I think the issue here is that there is no doubt that we need a new reorientation of our mind in Nigeria. There is no question about it, because sometimes it seems as if something has happened to Nigeria in the recent past, I'm talking about probably since the 1980s. Something that has happened to a political scientist, should give us exactly what has happened to our country, where nothing seemed to mean anything, that in fact our orientation now has taken us out of respect for talent, respect for gift, respect for education, and all that. In fact, it is all about those who can bamboozle us, who will tell you that they have billions of this and that and so on. So that particular worship and respect for money is creating it is kind of reverberating all over in everything we do in that country. That's why when you go there and you see somebody who works at the archives and say, please, I need you to help me to find so and so. Believe me, if you don't put money down, if you don't give him some for his pocket, and enough for photocopying and enough for him to even have lunch the next day. In fact, if you give him very little money, he said, look, you haven't started. You don't know what we do here. That's how they don't even care about whether they lose the job or what. That has become a norm. It's a common practice. In fact, if you just go there, say, I want A, B, C, D, and then you walk away, then you will never get one. So that's a particular orientation that we're talking about here. These are the people, are they the people that we expect that will champion the digitization? In fact, they will kill all the computers, because digitization will mean that you are depriving them of their means of livelihood. Digitization means you can get this document from anywhere just by sitting on your computer, you get it. They'll be thinking, oh, how are we going to survive? People are not going to come here and give us money anymore. The Nigerian mentality now is that they would destroy the computer that will even do the digitization instead of letting it happen. What do we do? So that's on the one side. On the other side about mythology, really, I think Dike was also responding to the whole idea of the importance of oral tradition by talking about this, because most of our oral tradition has this thing of, recalling the mythical stories and the romantic past and all that. But sometimes also you can also find in them, if you seriously, inquire, some of what you are looking for, about the other part, the other side. And Dike had always insisted that it's not just using only oral tradition to reconstruct. It has to be complemented by other sources. That's good. The other sources could be just a fossilized remains, it could be artifacts, could be other things, not necessarily written document. So there is no way. I agree with Njoku, who was talking about look at European, look at their own. It is only when they get to Africa they actually forget about where they started. In fact, they emphasize something else to Africans rather than to tell. They created much of their history from, this myth and mythologize the same thing, though. I don't want to go there because I don't want anybody to say that I'm stretching it. Otherwise, I wanted to go use the Bible too, to tell you about the whole thing about the Old Testament and the myths that are in there that helped us to record, and the people hold to it now as if it is the gospel truth. But there were things that are constructed there, mythical figures that conjures a whole lot of, and they force us to really look more into the Bible. I think that's we leave it at that. Those things, if you don't have a romantic past, in fact, you are not even going to go back there and start inquiring about. But we have to say our ancestors were this, they were that, they developed. Then an inquiring mind will say, did they? Let me go and find out.
Okay.
That's how it is. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We are almost out of time, but we have one more. Excuse me, we have Obed Monago raised his hand. So, Chief Doctor Biko, if you could allow me to allow Obed Monago to ask his or her question, and then I will ask our presenter to wrap it up. Okay, Obed. Hello?
Yeah, please. Thanks for the opportunity. And I want to say a big thanks to Prof for this excellent presentation. It's very well researched. But, having listened to the concerns, with respect to the destruction of these historical archives in our universities, I have a question. Like I said earlier, I'm not a historian, but am I in a position to challenge this organization, Igbo Studies Association, to come up with an initiative, that will undertake to preserve these historical documents going forward, even if it will entail buying the digitizing equipment and hiring the staff to digitize them? Because, we're out here listening. We had all these complaints. It's a concern to everybody. But what's the solution going forward? So what can this organization do, to help preserve this document going forward? Okay. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So as I said, we are out of time, and Professor Nwauwa, could you give us one or two sentences to that? And then...
Yes. The very last speaker, I think the point there is the point made there is very important. It's Honorable Obed about what can we do, and I think it is something this association will, because I know. If charity begins at home, in fact, maybe a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. And I believe that if we can have the resources, if we can have those that can sponsor this, and I think we can do this, because if we just said that one of the goals, one of the things that the Igbo Studies Association has set out to do now is to digitize, starting from the archives that are located in even Igbo land. We want to digitize them, and then we call for sponsors, and we also call for equipment. We also call for those who are, I think Honorable Obed here, as you see him, is an engineer. He can actually be we can call on him. And we've raised money before, and there are, I don't believe I was a former president of this organization. And we know that sometimes if we earmark what we want to do, that this is all about digitization, and we are calling on those lovers of education and knowledge to come to our aid and to come to help us here and to get us the digital machine to do this, and also the resources, the manpower, and we will give them the people that can do this. I think we can start something. I don't want to leave it to Historical Society of Nigeria to do. If Igbo Studies Association starts it, I am telling you, we may finish in Igbo land and we move to the Western, to Ibadan and to other places. It is possible. So let us start thinking about it, Honorable President Igbo Studies Association. And if we need the resources, I will link you up with Honorable Obed Mona. I know him. He can move people to get us started. I'm serious. So
wonderful.
After, that notwithstanding, I think I'm just gonna I'm going to thank everybody, and once again, Prof. Lozada Eze, our honorable president of ISA, I want to thank you, and our former vice president ISA, who served with me when I was president, Professor Akachi Ezigbo, the eminent scholar here, and I can see a whole lot of other scholars here. I thank all of you. I see Professor Kefa Otiso. I also see Chief Mark Ogu, the Dikemba of I see a number of others here. So Mr. Ibe, I thank everyone.
Andrew Cancer. ADC.
Andrew Cancer. I wonder why you didn't ask question. That's my deputy secretary general in African Diaspora Congress is also here from Ghana, and so many others. Thank you so much for coming today. You know, it's a very nice. Anybody who just logged in today, we love knowledge and interaction, intellectual exchange, and it is almost, we've been here for almost like an hour and a half, and we're still here interacting, and I want to thank everyone for coming to have this exchange. And once again, Honorable President, thanks for inviting me to do this. Thank you.
All right, I thank you, every one of you. And just so that we wouldn't ignore any person, I think Chief Dr. Gomba asked a question about writing modern history, and I think this is a very profound. That's already what our two presenters are doing. I just checked their works, and their works are based also on modern Igbo history. And that's also part of what ISA is doing, not just, that's part of one of the reasons we established this lecture series. So we move from history to current affairs, just as Professor Joko hinted, also to literature, to everything. So ISA has taken up this job, this goal, this challenge of rediscovering our history and also writing a new one. So I thank every one of you for coming here and okay, so stay tuned for the next lecture. Thank you very much, and God bless all of you.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone. Yes.
Thank you
everyone.
Thank you, and
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.